remember now.
Okay. Well, you probably remember your granddad Johnston, right?
Beg pardon?
You remember your granddad Johnston, right?
No, I don't remember him at all. I was in Fairbanks once or twice when I was 4 or 5 years old. And my memory is, I don't remember any people that I met in Fairbanks. And I don't remember any events. The only thing I remember is going by dog sled from over the winter trail between Iditarod and Fairbanks. But that's all I remember of my early Alaskan days. I do remember some of later times in Iditarod, or Flat, which is next to Iditarod, when I was going to school. But it's very, very hazy. My memory of early childhood things is not good because I was 8 or 9 years old when I left Iditarod, and there are very few memories besides beside school and being chased by some big dogs from a dog team that got loose.
Okay, well then, do you remember your parents ever talking about him or something like that?
No, I remember isolated events, such as the birth of my sister Anita in an otter creek in Flat, when in the afternoon when my father was at work and I had to run about 1.5 miles to the little town of Flat, and there was no doctor there, but I got the man who ran the drugstore and a lady friend who came out and accomplished the birth of Anita. But and the important thing, I guess the reason I remember it, is that I had to go across a swinging bridge across a small river, and it was just suspended on a cable, and it wasn't very steady underfoot, and that scared the living daylights out of me, and I remember that very well. But that is more important than the birth of Anita, the fact that I had to do that by myself, and always somebody held my hand when I went across it before. Okay.
Just put on pause. Is it on?
Yeah.
Jason, have him do the story about the dog sled ride. It's okay if it's out of order.
Yeah, mine's for it.
That's okay. Just do it out of order, that's all right.
So, let's see, tell me about the dog sled ride thing.
Well, traveling from the interior of Alaska in the winter time was entirely by dog sled. In the summertime, you could go by boat. It was a very roundabout boat trip, but in the winter it was a direct trip by dog sled, and you just started out with a sled filled with what you needed, the equivalent of sleeping bags, but they weren't bags, they were just heavy quilts, and some food and your clothes. And there's my father and my mother and myself, and there were roadhouses built about every 30 miles, I guess, or 20 miles, but they figured it just enough for a day's travel. And then there was a roadhouse, and some of the roadhouses had men who were living there and would cook for you and provide a place, some bunks for sleeping. But a lot of them were not occupied, and they were just cabins that had stoves in them, and when you got there, you cut the wood and lit a fire and got the cabin warm and made your meal, stayed overnight, and then in the morning you cleaned up and chopped enough wood to replace what you'd used and shut the door and left it for the next traveler to come. And the trip took about 2 weeks from going from flat to Iditarod to the upper Kuskokwim to McGrath, the town of McGrath, which was a sort of a transportation center on the Kuskokwim River. And then you started over lake again and hit these various roadhouses. And the next big stop was a place called Lake Minchumina.
Can you spell that?
M-I-N-C-H C-H-U-M-I-N-A. And it's rather a large lake, and it there were native settlements, not large, but 2 or 3 igloos at various points on Lake Minchumina. And in later years, when the airplanes started, the float planes, small planes on floats, could land in Minchumina as and you deliver mail to it on the way to McGrath and to Flat and Iditarod. And then from Minchumina you went to Nenana and then into Fairbanks. And it was, say, it took about 2 weeks, and you were traveling all the time. And the thing that I remember most about it was the nights when we would all, mother and father and I would all get under the same blanket, and we wouldn't get undressed at all. You were just with all your heavy clothes on. But the thing I remember was hearing the wolves howl at a distance, and that didn't make me want to go to sleep very much. But it was interesting because it was different. I had never done anything like this, and it was actually very beautiful because you had long stretches of snow, just unbroken snow, and snow-laden trees, and it was a very handsome experience. And I remember that, I guess, probably more vividly than anything else.
Oh.
Oh, I
There
see.
you go.
Okay.
Now it's going.
Okay. Well, my mother and father were married in Fairbanks in 1908, and my father was mining, so there was no honeymoon. And when this mining season was over in the late fall, they left for Seattle for a honeymoon, and as soon as they got out here, they became aware that I was expected. And so they bought a house and stayed here the first year. And the house was on 616 32nd Avenue, which is out about 32nd and East Cherry. And I was born at home because in those days people didn't go to the hospital for birthing. And so, but in the spring of 1909, they sold the house and went back to Alaska. Then the gold rush in Iditarod and Flat had taken place, and that's where Mother and Father took me. And that was the first 30-day trip that we took on the boat upriver to Iditarod. Between Iditarod and Flat, there was a horse-drawn railway, which was just sort of a rectangular, 6 by 12 box with seats, a door and seats on the side of it that ran on wooden rails, and it went the 5 or 6 miles between Iditarod and Flat, where the mines were. And then we went 1 year, at least the one time, over the trail to Fairbanks, and then I went outside once or twice by riverboat, mostly with my mother, not with my father. Had to stay and work.
Whether someone was staying with your
No,
mother.
I don't think there was anyone. All of her family and his family were in Alaska.
I see.
So
Until you were, did you come back down?
Well, no,
at
we
any
stayed-
time until you came out and stayed?
Well, we stayed, I came out twice.
Mhm. You could put that on.
It's on.
Oh, it is.
I think it was twice, once or twice, that I came out alone with my mother.
Mhm.
And then in 1918, my mother and father decided to separate.
Mhm.
And she came out with myself and Anita, and we settled in Seattle, where we went to school. And I went first to Summit School, and then for 6 months, and then to Cascade School, which is down on Yale Avenue between Thomas and Harrison, one block west of East Lake. And I was there from the 4th grade until I graduated in about 1923. Then I went to Broadway High School for 4 years, graduated from there in 1927. I was salutatorian of the class, and I entered the university the fall of 1927. And I spent 5 years getting through. That was more than that, really. But anyway, I graduated in 1930 from the university in 1932. with lots of good grades, magna cum laude. And then in Phi Beta Kappa. And from there on, normally anyone with that scholastic record could get a scholarship. But it was in the middle of the Depression and there were no scholarships available. So what I got was a teaching fellowship in the political science department at the University of Washington, which paid me $35 a month for teaching 15 hours a week. But what really supported me was a job in the Commons. And it began with doing washing and waxing the floors 5 days a week. And after 2 years of that, I got the additional job of cashiering at lunch and dinner time. And that was very important. But actually, I worked at Frederick Nelson's. I was an alternate for the Frederick Nelson Scholarship. And it gave me a job weekends and holidays at Frederick's. But the pay was lousy, and so that the scrubbing floors was a step up financially. And I kept that the Commons job continually until I left school in '33. The year's fellowship in the political science department was not very interesting because the head of the department required all of his graduate students to take his courses because they weren't very popular with other people. And in addition to unpopular courses, we were expected to be at his beck and call whenever he had a dinner party or entertain friends. If he needed an additional for bridge or if he needed someone to pass hors d'oeuvres, he just nabbed his teaching fellows for the job. And it became a limiting factor too. In the wintertime, as representative of the Alaska Miners Association, I was what is known as a lobbyist for the mining interests. Because I was by then not an officer in the Alaska Miners Association. And your father was there, must have been in the legislature, because he was the last Republican in the legislature. And I went to dinner at the Tripp's house 3 or 4 times. And your dad took me there, and I met your mother, and this was before they were married.
Well, now that had to be earlier then, because I was born in '37.
Really?
Yeah, so they were married in '34.
Well,
It
then
couldn't have been.
they must have been
married.
they must have been married.
They were
then.
married.
They were married.
I
then.
was there when
Yeah, well,
I was
I
about
remember-
a year and a half or a year old or something, so perhaps I was visiting.
Well, I think the only first time I saw you was Fairbanks, just after you were born. Because I normally we used to go through Fairbanks instead of Anchorage because Pan Am's headquarters were in Fairbanks, and they ran the only good flight from Fairbanks to Bethel. They had the mail contract for one thing, but they had weather stations at Manchumana and McGrath and Flat and Bethel. And it was the only weather available to airplanes in all of Alaska. And they're Pan Am stations. Then later on, they had Fairbanks and Whitehorse and Juneau when they began running. You could fly to Juneau on Pan American and catch a boat there. And that was the way we went before they flew all the way to Seattle on the Canadian, through Prince George and so forth, Whitehorse and Prince George. And so you were born when?
37.
37. Then I met you, then I saw you in 37, because you were just born. And then it must have been 38 that I met the Trips, because I wasn't in Juneau until, it wasn't 36. I don't think it was 37. It was 38 and 39.
It's more like that because,
Right.
right.
But anyway, I did meet them, and it seemed to me you might have, you and your mother might, well, I don't know whether you were in Juneau with him, but he was the last of the Republicans. He was the only Republican to survive the Roosevelt deluge. And so I think he was there for legislature for some other reason. But anyway, I wouldn't have been to the Trips unless he was there.